With our next module, Module 4, I'm going to give an introduction to scouting and monitoring. And if you are following along in the digital version or paper version of the handbook, this is all covered in chapter 3 here. So as I mentioned before, it can be hard to observe what's going on in the soil. There's a couple different methods that are pretty accessible and DIY. Pictured here is a yellow sticky card, and that's an example of something that's good for catching smaller flying insects, but not necessarily a good option for soil invertebrates. At its most basic level, if you have a board or a rock, some other kind of flat, smooth object that you put on the soil surface over time and then come back and pick it up, at least you get a quick glance of some animals there. And pictured in this example, there's an earthworm up here, there's a beetle grub here, and there are a few smaller millipedes in here also. Not to mention some plant roots that have been growing there as well. There are some other methods that are a bit more advanced than just a board on the ground. And this is something called a pitfall trap, another method called the Berlazy funnel, and then another method called the Behrman funnel. I'll go into those a bit more, but they do require some equipment, just some plastic dishes, water with dish soap in it, needles and tweezers, some kind of magnification, whether that's a hand lens or magnifier, or if you're able to have access to a dissecting microscope, that can be good. And then different references to help with identification here. The lower right show what hand lenses look like. They're real powerful but small handheld magnifier. And then the left is a USB microscope, which is a neat tool that's been available now for a few years. You can find them online at $40 and up, and they plug in using a USB connection, and the image is actually projected then on a screen. So it's nice for a classroom scenario where everyone can see the same thing at the same time. You don't have to take turns looking through the viewfinders of a non-digital dissecting microscope, and actually much more affordable as well. So what are the different trapping methods here? This is examples of the Berlazy funnel. On the left is a do-it-yourself version, and the center and right pane show the professional entomologist version of that, but the concept and principles are the same. At the bottom, there's a kind of vessel to capture the animals that come out of the soil. And then that can be dry, but usually in this case, it's going to have some kind of liquid that both kills and immobilizes and preserves those animals. And then there is an inverted funnel that holds the soil sample. And then at the top of that is an incandescent or other light source that also has heat. And the principle here is that this is a soil sample that also contains a lot of the organic layer of leaves and other things from the soil surface and all the animals that are in that. And that's exposed to this heat and light source, which these animals don't like, the drying, the heat, or the light, and so they move downward. And the bottom of that funnel is open. So they are, over days usually of running the light source, the animals continue to try to escape, moving farther away or downward, and then they end up coming out at the bottom there. So this runs for several days. It's usually going to capture smaller animals rather than larger ones, and just because of that, the length of time, that's usually why a preservative liquid is used in the bottom. I mentioned also the Behrman funnel. This is less DIY, but it's another method for looking at really small animals, especially nematodes. and it involves a couple of just water solutions and filtrations and kind of concentrating the sample and then looking at those in a special dish underneath a microscope. The most user-friendly and accessible one is the pitfall trap method. And it's really what it sounds like. You get a plastic container, often just a disposable drinking cup is a good choice. And you find your site and dig a hole that matches the dimensions more or less of this cup. You put the rim of it flush with the soil surface and then gently fill in the gaps around the edge. You leave that for a set period, usually just overnight. And then any of the meso or macroinvertebrates that are crawling along the soil surface, they just get unlucky and happen to drop in. This is one where if you want to do a catch and release and not kill, you can leave this container dry or empty. You can also put in a liquid like soapy water to immobilize or kill what falls in there. Sometimes rodents will get in here, so you may want to put like a very coarse metal mesh over it. And also if you're expecting or it might rain, you don't want too much rainwater to wash into it. So the picture on the left shows one that's got a corrugated plastic roof set up over it. We don't talk too much about dung beetles when we talk about urban soil invertebrates. They are more associated with larger ruminants like cattle. But if you're specifically looking for them, they're so sensitive to dung or manure and smell that. And so researchers who are wanting to count dung beetles will actually, so you see there in the center photo, put a little attractant of dung suspended above the pitfall trap to bring in the dung beetles. These photos show a soil health training event that we did with NRCS staff from across the country, as well as some more local soil and water conservation district staff. On the left, we have one of those USB microscopes set up. We had pitfall traps that were set out the night before, and we went early on this morning and brought them in, and then sorted through them on the plate that you can see there, and then put them one by one under that microscope. And this laptop was connected to a big projector and screen, so everyone in that training could see them. And then one of the entomologists there talked us through each of the samples that had been caught. On the right shows one of those homemade Berlese funnel setups. And like I mentioned, since these take several days to run, they're not as good to use in a one-day training event, but they can be useful to work with individual farmer clients or on your own where you have a longer amount of time to let the sample be processed. These just show a few more examples of when we've held this same online course in person. We did a demonstration. We went out the day before into different types of soil management and crops. Here's an example at a urban community garden in Wisconsin, where there's a buckwheat cover crop. You can see we pulled the vegetation back a little bit and dug the hole and put the cup in there. And then it's important to use a flag or some other kind of marker so you can find your way back to them. Here you can see how the soil is much more tilled and managed and kept bare in some cut flower production. I see that, Kelly, thank you. And then we also have one other example here, deploying those traps in tomatoes. There are two resources I'm going to go through here that help us okay, you've done this pitfall trap, you've caught some animals in it. How do you interpret what you caught? This is a one sheet, two-sided guide for soil scouting. It's linked in that e-packet of resources. So this side explains what I just went through, how to do the pitfall trapping. And then here's an example I did a few years ago near my home. I was in, I put one in a crop field that had some tillage. It had also already had a cereal cover crop flown over, and those seeds were starting to germinate at the time. I don't know if you can see all that in the photo. And then I also put pitfall traps in this cool season grass roadside between the crop field and the road, and then across the road in a cattle pasture that was much more diverse in terms of the plant community there without any disturbed soil. And this was rather late in the growing season, so there weren't a lot of really exciting animals captured, but in the cornfield there were springtails and a few ants. The roadside had a few crickets, and the pasture had more crickets. So once I get those results, then this is the backside of that reference, and this is what it looks like when I filled out the information. There's some general data about when and where it was taken, and this is really focusing on those apex predators that I showed before, things like ground beetles, ground-dwelling spiders, and tiger beetles. In my case, I didn't find any of those, but I just noted what I did find. We also have, well, let me just back up here. Like that cornfield, there were springtails there, and that is something that made sense right there. When they're on the surface, they're often the types of springtails that are decomposing or breaking down some of that organic matter there. And then what goes into a little more detail about interpreting what you find is this other Xerces guide. It's a small pocket guide. It just is a single sheet of paper with two sides. It folds up really nicely so you can put it in your pocket and take it out with you. And there's more information here as when you find these kinds of animals, what do they indicate here? So I'll just use the earthworms as an example. You can see there as indicators, and it says they're large in size and easy to recognize. So that's important. You need to be able to see these and observe them. Earthworms tend to be sensitive to pesticides and tillage, like extensive or frequent soil disturbance is something that reduces earthworm abundance. They can also be an indication that there's better water infiltration in that soil. So I'd seen there was a question in the chat, and getting at this, right? How do we know what these animals are indicating? What do they tell us about soil health? This is still a fairly new and emerging piece of soil ecology, but there are some generalizations that we can take when we observe these animals, and this pocket guide to soil invertebrates as bioindicators is meant to help and support that. And then just wrapping up here, this was the same food web I showed before. I had my slides slightly out of order here, but that's what I wanted to say about the springtails in the cornfield sample.